This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Capped off what was a great in-ring pay-per-view. Just a pretty much fantastic show from top to bottom.
One of an all-time great show, I thought.
All right, fine. I give up. You win. I have completely accepted defeat on this. I am out of touch with the current wrestling market and have absolutely nothing in common with any of these blokes that watch today. Seriously, an all-time great show. Just fuck off, Dave. Does anyone still actually take that guy's opinion seriously? You know what, let me tell you a thing or two about Dave Meltzer. I might be one of the only longtime smart fans that never jumped aboard the Dave Meltzer train. Now, for all the talk about what a genius Meltzer is and was to the wrestling business historically, I might be one of the very few people that always thought that guy was overrated as all get out. And it's not to say that I've never agreed with him on anything or thought that he was wrong on everything, far from it. I just might be one of the few that always took his reporting with a grain of salt because I've always found Dave's writing and radio discussions off-putting. I mean, the guy's never been particularly good at radio to begin with. He can barely string together a damn sentence without dropping you know and every other word. It's insufferable to listen to. But my God, regardless of where you stand with AEW or what you thought about that pay-per-view from Sunday night as a whole, I don't even care if you like the show. Or even if you're one of the rationalist wrestling fans out there that aren't constantly sucking at the teat of AEW day in and day out, if you're one of those people that said it exceeded your lower expectations because of how bad the buildup was, to sit there and state the claim that it was an all-time great show, dude, how do you even respond to something that stupid? Because it's one thing to have some dumb average Joe Mark try and claim that it was an all-timer, but Dave Meltzer, the guy that's supposed to be one of the most credible wrestling sources we have left in the business, that's just insulting. And especially for the people that know better. And for the people that don't have their heads lodged so far up AEW's rectum you can't think straight. All this does is grant Tony Khan more undeserving acclamation, and it's going to encourage him to revert to this same exact shitty booking formula when, God forbid, they try and book the show for next year. And speaking of the Forbidden Door fallout, remember when I said that the company was going to do virtually nothing to recap anything that went down on the show from Sunday night? Well, guess what AEW did a shitty job of doing? When I say there was zero follow-up with anything that happened on the Forbidden Door show, I'm not exaggerating. There were no video packages, no highlight reels, no interviews, not a word. Zilp, zitch, nada. Which I'm not surprised about. It's AEW. There's no follow-through with anything this company ever does. It's get there, get it done, and on to the next thing. Hotshot booking, no rational forethought or aftermath follow-through with anything. It's all geared to the marks. And boy, do they follow that alleged all-time pay-per-view from Sunday night with a hot mess of a television program. This was I don't even really know how to summarize it. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think, here's how I can best break it down. The entire first hour of the show felt like I was watching one of those early AEW Dynamites back from like 2019, early 2020, when the show was just god-awful every week and they had all the outlaw talent sucking up television time and you couldn't take anything seriously. And then the second hour, which was the actual War Games match, had its moments where it felt like I was watching a good professional wrestling show, and then it quickly fell victim to every modern trope we see in garbage hardcore matches, and it completely killed all the steam for me. So let's just start tearing into this thing, because there's a lot to say about that main event alone, and I'm kind of trying to forget that I ever saw this first hour of programming, because goddamn was it horrible. Anyway, it's blood and guts. And hey, I'll give them this. At least they were smart enough to save it for the main event. Because with the drop-off this show consistently gets with overall viewership from week to week, they need to keep as many people watching this show as humanly possible. Unfortunately, they picked the wrong week to try and sell people on that, because if there's one thing that we've undoubtedly determined about AEW's ongoing injury problem, you take out the actual names like Danielson, Punk, Cole, MJF, etc., you are left with some of the worst cast of remaining scraps you've got left on your roster. Maybe discount FTR, but we'll get to that piece of business momentarily. And they were off to a lovely start with making sure that people stayed tuned in from the beginning. Their opening match is Orange Cassidy versus Ethan Page. Just twisting the knife further into my spine, aren't you, Tony? You really just can't get enough of this ass clown, can you? And it's made even worse by the fact that apparently Chucklefuck Taylor is still sucking money out of Tony's pocket. As I mentioned earlier, going back to AEW's old TV shows from a couple years ago before they actually had star power and names, and we'd see Cassidy, Chuck, and Trent every single week on this show doing bad comedy and absolutely sucking as pro wrestlers, omitting Trent if he was working on his own. Well, here we are. It's 2022, and with the top names out of action right now, this is what we're left with. The Peanut Gallery. I mean, I honestly don't even know what else I can say that I already haven't said about fucking Slapnuts a million times by now. Cassidy sucks. Everything about his shtick is awful. His ring work is atrocious. He looks like garbage. And Ethan Page is a completely wasted talent that instead of AEW actually doing something constructive with, they're jobbing him out to a comedy goofball that looks like he's a 12-year-old. Directly taken from the mouth of Dan Lambert. And he's not wrong. And by the way, not just jobbing out Ethan Page in a total joke of a match, but beating him with a fucking body slam. Right, because, after seeing these fuckers kick out of Canadian destroyers and every other move in the book that ought to look like it'd paralyze you after taking it, you job out a potential talent to a guy half of his size with a body slam. So that segment can go piss up a rope. That was followed with a twist for the ages. It started off promising with Christian Cage coming out for another promo with Tony Schiavone. And with MJF missing right now, Christian has become wrestling's de facto top heel. And the guy's a perfect douchebag prick. Never had a bad word to say about Christian the entire time I've ever watched him wrestle throughout his career. Maybe looking back in hindsight, I can blame him for participating in all the TLC matches and sort of educating the modern wrestling fans that this kind of stuff is normal and okay to do. And he's out there cutting another heat promo on Jungle Boy, saying he was told to come out and apologize for the things he said last week, But the only thing he's sorry for is that he did not wish that Jungle Boy's entire family was dead, outside of his father. Except for Jungle Boy's mama, because as we learned last week, she apparently has the hots for Captain Charisma. So this is all great, and he's saying that he initially requested a match for this week, but it's not a match for him. So then out comes Luchasaurus with new music, new gear, and a new mask. It was interesting, to say the very least. Not the direction I expected them to go with the dinosaur. And he goes in there and kills Serpentico in a 30-second squash. Got him over like a total beast. And then Christian had him lay out the guy after the match with a chokeslam on the floor, which I wasn't all that big a fan of. Like, kill the guy with a chokeslam in the ring where he can safely bump. Not on the goddamn floor surface where it's harder on his back. Like, come on, guys. But I'm not going to entirely dismiss this. I said last week that I'm still a little on the fence about the Luchasaurus thing and how it's going to fit into this whole equation. But I can totally get on board with him going on a monster tangent with Christian sort of reinforcing him as a manager / mouthpiece. I prefer they focus the spotlight more on Christian getting heat to set up the Jungle Boy feud, but if they're going to include the dinosaur in there, this is not a bad way to go about it. Will they fuck it up eventually? Oh, of course they will. There's not a doubt in my mind they'll screw this up. But hey, in the short term, Christian getting to work closely with Luchasaurus and teach him how to work more effectively on his own, that'll be good for him. Hopefully he actually takes his advice into consideration. So then we had a backstage deal with Scorpio Sky and Wardlow to set up their TNT title match for next week. And guess what? It's going to be a street fight. And because I've totally given up caring about this program and it's doomed to eternal damnation, instead of asking why, I now simply ask, why not? Why not have a street fight for no reason after we just saw a main event this week with weapons where guys were bleeding like faucets and breaking out every fucking gimmick in the book? Wardlow better win that belt. That's all I'm going to say about that. And in Tony Khan's continuing quest to anally torment every last remaining pro wrestling fan that still exists, the next match is Max Caster and the Gun Club versus Danhausen and his two specially selected partners for this match, FTR. Yes, they had Dax and Cash making run-in saves for the company mascot in the lead-up to the pay-per-view. Now Tony's got Dax and Cash associating themselves with a comedy act, Danhausen. Again, I ask, why not? They are destined to sabotage those guys' career at every turn possible. I wonder who they got in Tony's ear. By the way, this is my first time seeing Danhausen wrestle. Air quotes around that. Here are my first impressions, directly taken from my notes. He's very nice, very evil, very small, and very pale. He's a case of the next time he hits the weight machines, it'll be the first time he ever hits the weight machines. We also got confirmation in this match that Anthony Bowens was apparently working the wheelchair gimmick the entire time. And actually, the acclaimed Ass Boys angle was the central focus of the match. Because the babyfaces won, and then Daddy Gunn got into a shoving deal with his sons afterwards. He shamed them for being worthless scrubs, and then he sided with Caster and Bowens. So I guess the story is now that the Guns and the Acclaimed will be feuding, and Billy Gunn will be the Acclaimed's mouthpiece. So that whole thing has Rampage Death Slot written all over it. Jade Cargill had a TBS Championship title defense against someone. Didn't even bother writing her name down. Jade won, didn't watch, didn't care. And that was the entire first hour of AEW programming. One of the worst first hours of Dynamite I can recall in a long time. Just one bad segment after another with very little redeeming quality to any of it. And once again, a clear indicator of just how badly missing the top guys are right now. And you know what, let me say this real quick before we dive into the main event. Because I hear this conversation being stirred up a lot right now, especially on the threads and the news bulletins. You know, for all the people that want to sit there and say, oh, AEW has such a stacked roster, they got plenty of guys to cover for all the injuries they've got going on right now. To which I say, well, they've definitely got a lot of guys. I will not dispute the large assembly of bodies they have locked under contract right now. But then the problem comes in where you have to start actually having a conversation about how many of those guys are actually over or anywhere near the level of a Punk, a Danielson, or an MJF. And the answer is none of them. And it's not even close. The closest names they've got right now that are not currently on the injured list are FTR, who AEW never do anything with and constantly beat them like a drum, and Claudio Castagnoli, who was in the main event, but he was doing garbage hardcore wrestling with a bunch of other garbage outlaw guys that were given no reason to give a fuck about. So yeah, sure, they've got a lot of guys. Most of them suck and couldn't draw money with green crayon and white paper, but that's a conversation that no one's going to have, excluding the actual sane wrestling fans that aren't constantly stroking off to this product every single week, no matter what they do, good, bad, or otherwise. Because then you actually have to start having to analyze AEW's roster and coming to grips with the reality that it's more of a quantity over quality situation. But please, y'all come firing at me with your disagreements because I'm more than happy to have this discussion. I want to see someone try and rationally defend Orange Cassidy and Danhausen as suitable replacements for CM Punk and MJF. Just try coming up with the defense mechanism for that. I dare you. But then we got the War Games match. And they dedicated the entire second hour to this calamity, I guess you could say. And I didn't mention this at the top. I probably should have, but they went with the double ring setup like the good old days. They also told us in the video package beforehand that the Jericho Appreciation Society had the team advantage in this match. How, when, where they got the team advantage, your guess is as good as mine. Did it happen in the hair match with Ortiz on Dynamite a couple weeks back? No clue. It was never explained. So the JAS crew come out in whatever in the hell that red garb was supposed to be. They all looked like a bunch of dorks. At least they actually came out as a full unit, unlike the babyfaces who had like 3 or 4 separate entrances for their various teammates. And of course, they've all got weapons in hand, so you knew immediately where this thing was going before they even rang the opening bell. But we'll talk more about that once we start breaking down the match. And these matches are always hard to dissect because there's a lot of crap going on for most of it, but I'm going to do my best. I'm sure I'll be glossing over some spots here and there, but also understand that I was never really engaged in this feud from the onset, so my level of care going in was already pretty low. Well, they fucked up the first spot of the whole match. Maybe that should have been an omen for how the rest of the thing was going to go. Honestly, I don't even know what the game plan was with this because... Okay, so Claudio and Guevara start. And because they had the 2 rings, both guys are stationed at complete opposite ends of the rings. So I guess in their minds they thought, let's do a running start where we charge at the other and whatever happens, happens, I guess. Well, suffice it to say, they got tripped up in the middle area of the ropes that separated both rings, and the only thing that saved it was Claudio's superhuman strength. There were also multiple commercial breaks during this that made it impossible to ever get fully invested in the action, because even when a big spot would occur at some point, they would usually cue that right to the commercial break, which is absolutely retarded for a whole other cast of reasons that I'm not even going to go into right now. It was very interesting to see Hager and Claudio squaring off together, especially when the fans started the "We the People" chant. Back when WWE was still rotten, but not totally rotten. That was the team headed by Dutch Mantel too, right? Generally, the early stages of the match were perfectly fine before all the weapon garbage. It's all the usual formulaic War Games booking where they start even, the heels cut off the faces for the heat before the baby faces even the odds again. It's not the most exciting wrestling story in the world, but it's at least coherent. But as soon as Mox came in and started breaking out the gimmicks, that's when this thing just went to hell in a handbasket. By the way, him chucking that chair right into Hager's face, Concussion City. Just, my God. I also like how the fork spot is just another spot in garbage matches anymore. You've got Moxley driving a fork into Garcia's face at one point, and meanwhile, Excalibur is just casually calling the other ring action like nothing is out of the ordinary. Just a guy wedging a fork into someone's eye socket. Yeah, and you see that every day. It's kind of like how the spot where one of the JAS guys gets spiked onto shards of glass with a pile driver, and it was followed with more stuff. By the way, a pile driver onto glass that happened during commercial. Genius. So like I said, the weapon usage just kind of took me out of this thing for the rest of it. I'm sick of the gimmicks. I'm sick of the outlaw bullshit. I'm just over it at this point. I don't want to see it. And the thing that sucks is, if these people actually had a fucking clue what they were doing and only broke out the gimmicks and blood for this one match every year, I can maybe see it in a different light. Because at least it'd be fresh. I don't like hardcore wrestling to begin with, but I can at least agree with the argument that, well, it's a War Games match, so you need the blood to put over the dangerous match environment. Fully agreed. No qualms with that. The problem is that we see blood and weapon usage every single week on the show for no rhyme or reason, so what makes this any different or special than the rest of them? Because it's in a cage? Or because they named the thing Blood and Guts? Who cares? Especially when you're advertising a fucking street fight on next week's show anyway. Elsewhere, there's a spot where Santana goes for some kind of uranagi, but whoever he was giving the move to, I guess he came down onto his knee, so, he was pretty much out the rest of the match. I'm sure that'll be another body to tack onto the morgue. The injury list. Fantastic AEW moment here, where Ty Conti is trying to squeeze a fucking bottle of rubbing alcohol through the grating of the cage to pass to Jericho. But of course, the bottle is too wide, so instead of getting the camera off of them until they can get the bottle into the cage, the cameraman just stands there filming it like a total idiot. And the production team does not bother cutting away to another shot until like 15 seconds after the fact. And by the way, what did the rubbing alcohol angle lead to? Nothing! Also, because these guys are absolute morons, they got spots where guys are dumping rubbing alcohol into open lacerations. What a bunch of dopes. Anyway, this was the point in the match where I wrote down, shit is happening and I'm not sure exactly what led up to it. There's a spot where Garcia's just kind of hanging upside down outside the cage by his leg on one of the supporting beams. How he ended up there, I have no idea, but they also pitched it to commercial afterwards, so no big deal, I guess. Someone got put through a table at one point. I think it was Hager. I think my favorite part of this entire match, and I actually rewound this on my DVR to go back and watch it. Okay, get this spot. So, Jericho is over in the corner grabbing a fire extinguisher. Where this fucking fire extinguisher came from, I don't know, but just roll with it. And he's going to do the spot where he discharges it into Kingston's face, but because Kingston is out of place for it, Jericho does it too soon, which means that Kingston has to basically go, oh shit, and he actually ran toward the smoke so that he could get blinded by it and take the fall backwards. And once again, the camera filmed this botched angle instead of cutting to something else. Amateur hour. Speaking of such, the big angle toward the end of the match is Ty Conti bumping one of the referees so she can grab the key to unlock the cage. And because these people are idiots and don't think anything through, as soon as Conti unlocks the door, the split second that lock comes off the chain, Ruby Riott is right there ringside to thwart her and chase her to the back. Timing is impeccable on this show. Oh, by the way, Ruby Riott and Ty Conti getting into a brawl while Ty Conti is in high heels. Yes, Ty had to do a fake fight with Ruby in what was essentially a skirt and high heels. God bless her. And by the way, what exactly was her plan when she opened the door to the cage? Well, I'm not exactly sure, now that you mention it. Was she going to try and enter the ring? Was she that stupid where she would try to run into the ring where there are 10 grown adult men slashing each other open with gimmicks and tearing up the ring left and right? Oh, the answer is they needed to get to the spot where the guy could start climbing the cage so that they could proceed with spots X, Y, and Z and, basically turn the match into every modern War Games deal in the past 10 years instead of just sticking with what the whole gimmick of the War Games was designed to be in the first place. That being confining the match in the ring, hence the entire concept of the fucking War Games deal to begin with. So they're all idiots. Nothing's new. Of course, actually, probably my favorite, or my second favorite part of the match, if only because it was hilarious. Sammy takes the pratfall off the cage through the gimmick timekeeper's table, crash pad and all, and they make sure to pan the camera all the way out so that we see this whole visual of Sammy falling to his death. And of course, what is the follow-up from Excalibur? Blood and guts continues after this picture-in-picture, don't go away! Yes, the death-defying mankind being thrown off the cell spot was not the finish, but a pitch to commercial. I lost it. Honest to God, that was the funniest commercial pitch I've ever seen in the history of pro wrestling. Not even bothering to sell the severity of what just happened, just going, okay, he's fine. Well, we got sponsors we need to plug, so we'll be right back. Hopefully, Sammy's still breathing by the time we come back. Anyway, skipping to the finish here, Claudio ended up doing the swing spot on top of the cell to Jericho, which was actually probably scarier than the Sammy pratfall, if I'm being honest. And I'm not entirely sure what the setup was here, but somehow Kingston had Jericho trapped in the stretch plum, while Cesaro had one of the Jericho appreciators and a sharpshooter behind Kingston. And while the babyfaces have the heels locked in both of these holds, the guy in the sharpshooter submits before Jericho, so Kingston's all pissed at Claudio because he stole the win, even though their team won. Once again, another one of those stupid AEW storylines that exist only in the minds of the marks. Apparently, Kingston and Claudio hate each other. Why? I don't know. They never explain it. They just assume everyone's in on the gag, so they don't feel a need to touch on it. And after the match was over, I said, thank Christ Bryan Danielson was not involved with this atrocity. After that, anarchy in the arena garbage. I'm sure Danielson caught wind of them wanting to do a War Games match and said, that doesn't work for me, brother. I'm just going to be over here working an injury and not involving myself with any of that. You guys want to go kill yourselves in a 45-minute hardcore gimmick match? Be my guest. I'll watch from the sidelines. Smart man. So there's your War Games Blood and Guts breakdown. I didn't see the one they did last year with the Jericho and the Pinnacle, so this is the first Blood and Guts War Games match I saw under the AEW banner. If they'd have taken out the stupid weapons and have just done a normal War Games match, it would have been 1,000 times better. Unfortunately, the boys in the business don't know any better these days, so they come up with a concept for a Blood and Guts match and they figure, we need weapons. Just stupid, lazy ECW booking. I didn't hate the match or anything, but do I have any desire to ever see it again? No, not really. You know, unless they're going to involve guys that actually know how to work and get juice the old-fashioned way with using the cage as the weapon instead of forks and knives and lead pipes and glass and tacks. And I'm just going to presume that every year when they do this match, it's going to be the same old formula of the way that AEW does every Carnage hardcore bullshit. The best cage match I've ever saw, it's Tully and Magnum at Starrcade 85 for the United States Heavyweight title. The I Quit cage match. And they bled like faucets. But you know what they did? They used the cage as the weapon. Because that's the whole entire premise of the cage match to begin with. There's no way in, no way out. And the only thing that you have is the two guys in the ring doing a little fight and the cage surrounding it. It's fair game. If they want to use that cage to slice each other open and lacerate each other to the kingdom fucking come, so be it. But God almighty, the gimmicks they were using in this thing is just stupid. The cage is just there. That's what makes the whole concept of this thing so stupid to begin with. They're using all this other garbage throughout this match. Meanwhile, the cage is just hanging out. They could use it as a weapon if they so choose. They could ram each other's faces into it. They could slice each other open that way. Nope. Got to break out the forks. Got to break out the tacks. All the old hardcore tropes that are overdone to death and we see every single week on this show. But what else is new? These people have no original ideas. So it's just take outdated concepts that were done 20-something years ago, do it today, and people are idiots, so they'll still cheer for it. It was certainly better than the first hour of the show, but it's not saying a whole lot because god damn was that first hour wretched. And that'll take us to NWA World Championship Wrestling from June 28th, 1986. And last week we had a 37-minute program where every single match on the show lasted about a sum total of 1 minute and some change. This week we had closer to what I say would be a full-length TV episode on the Superstation. But instead of a 90-minute program, this one was only about 60. It's also important to know that this was the final set of studio tapings before the 86 Great American Bash Tour began. All through the month of July, the NWA were running events across the country in multiple cities and venues, beginning, I believe, in Philly, and working its way through DC, to Charlotte, to Memphis, to Roanoke, to Jacksonville, all the big major wrestling cities. Not in that order I just mentioned, but they were among the list of cities that they visited. And it's unfortunate that the WWE ended up switching to Peacock, and I couldn't get the opportunity to review the couple of Bash shows that were once uploaded on the old version of the WWE Network. They used to have it filed under one of their Hidden Gems series, And, of course, they moved everything to Peacock, and a lot of the old territorial footage got wiped out entirely and had to be re-uploaded in some capacity. As far as my recollection goes, I don't believe there is any 86 Bash footage on the current Peacock library. Their Great American Bash video library starts with the 88 Bash in Baltimore, but nothing prior to that. I would have liked to have gotten the chance to see that show and do a review of the July 5th Bash from Charlotte. As far as I know, though, there's no way to really access that on any video platform. I mean, even places like YouTube or any of the torrent streaming sites, there's nothing. I've talked about doing substitution wrestling recaps for, dates when there are not Superstation shows going on, but the unfortunate thing is I did a little brief research to see if there were any other major events or pay-per-views that occurred on the July 5th date. Outside of some house show events from the 90s and some AAA and New Japan shows from the later 2000s, there's nothing else that historically took place on the July 5th date in wrestling. So I'm going to talk a little later about what the plan is for next week on the Friday podcast, because there actually isn't an episode of World Championship Wrestling to recap next week. But anyway, let's get going with the show here. We started the program this week with footage of last week's final segment where Hawk, I wanted to say ran in during a scheduled Tony Zane-Ric Flair match. It's more accurate to say Hawk leisurely paced to the ring with the intention of maiming Ric Flair on the spot. And we already kind of talked about that segment in detail last week, but once they air the full segment later on, we'll do a brief analysis of it again just to give you a overview of it in case you missed last week's retro episode. It's a pretty great little closing angle, so it's definitely worth touching on again. And as we cut to the booth, we properly get Jim Cornette and Big Bubba out for a promo. And he informs us that he will be co-hosting the show alongside David Crockett and Tony Schiavone for reasons that were not entirely explained. Although I certainly won't complain about Cornette being out to provide commentary, especially after the stellar performance he had on this particular episode. Corny's line of the century in here when he says, and I quote, "Baby doll is so fat, when she's standing on the street corner, the cops have to come up and tell her to break it up." This was not the only classic quote we got on the show. One thing that became abundantly clear before this show was over, the star stud of this episode was Jim Cornette. No question. So then the Midnights wrestled Sam Houston and George South. It actually hit me in the early goings of this match. One move that is greatly missing in the business today is the running head scissors takeover. I'm not talking about the one where the guy locks the ankles around the guy's neck and does like the little Rana takeover. I'm talking about the one where the guy runs up, leaps up to wrap his legs around the guy's neck, and then pulls him down that way. The old Kevin Von Erich head scissors takeover. Houston did that to Eaton here, and it looked fantastic. And we used to see it all the time back in the day, but I don't know, somewhere along the way, the boys just stopped doing it. They replaced the head scissor takeover with a Canadian destroyer. Yeah. Actually, I think the last time I remember seeing that move done on a major wrestling show was probably back on Nitro during like the 96 or 97 period where guys like Rey Mysterio or Eddie Guerrero were doing them in the cruiserweight matches. Great little match, though. It's good when Eaton and Condrey actually can wrestle enhancement talent that, well, can actually wrestle. And then we cut back to the booth for another corny promo spectacular. Right out of the gate, Tony's talking about how the NWA receives a lot of fan mail, and Cornette's response to this, point blank, "I don't care." Howled with laughter. Aside from that, he's plugging his Bash Tour matches with Baby Doll, and his closing line here, again, fantastic line, "Baby Doll, you may not always see Big Bubba, but Big Bubba can always see you." And I have no idea what that was supposed to imply, but The fact that Cornette looked into the camera and grinned after he said that line, very unnerving. And then coming back from the break, we had another Cornette promo. And I know his gimmick for this show was that he was co-hosting as a color guy, but it was almost a little too much heat material being thrown at me all at once. Got to break up the monotony a little bit, you know what I mean? Here was the point where they replayed the footage of Dusty breaking the gimmick chair over Bubba's head, and Bubba no-sold it. Promised Dusty that he doesn't want to mess with Bubba, or it's going to be bad times for him. And while Tony's putting over how Cornette's training and getting ready for his match with Baby Doll, he proceeds to show us video footage of Baby Doll in training. And this was... well, I'll just take exactly what I wrote here in my notes. Baby Doll was doing the thing. She was using machines. She was pressing dumbbells. She was doing something that looked like an aerobics workout, although it's certainly not the kind of stretching I'm capable of doing. I don't think my crotchular region would take too kindly to the leg extensions that Baby Doll was doing here. At first, I was not entirely convinced that Baby Doll was actually working the machines because, well, they were doing one of those smoke and mirrors shots where they would film Baby Doll up close to show her breathing heavily and giving off the illusion that she was working, and then they would cut the camera to a shot of the weights moving up and down on the rack. But they never showed Baby Doll actually using the machine. But after a few minutes of seeing Baby Doll doing presses with the dumbbells and squats and all that hot jazz, I do have to presume that they were not working this workout session. Thinking about it in context, though, that's got to be very nerve-wracking to have someone film you mid-workout while you're trying to pick up heavy shit like that. I don't think I could do it. I'd be constantly distracted with the camera guy filming me the entire time. There's no way I'd be able to get through a set without getting sidetracked. And at the very end of this little workout video, she finishes a curling exercise. She starts walking to what appeared to be the snack machine. So I kind of figured the rib was going to be she was going to grab a candy bar or something. But no, instead she turns around, she looks at the camera, and then she gives one of those fist pumps to indicate that she's ready to kick some ass. I liked it. She's certainly in better shape than a lot of the fucking boys in the business today. I mean, most of the modern wrestlers don't even look like they've ever stepped foot in a gym, much less do a couple of body curls or bench presses. Baby Doll had muscle definition. I will give her that. And then we immediately cut to the ring for an Ivan, Nikita, and Crusher Khrushchev versus Vernon Deaton, Rocky King, and Gene Ligon match. And in continuing with the great corny one-liners on this show, God, this fucker was on fire with the promos this week. There's a part in this match where he's taking a jab at Vernon Deaton. And first off, it's hilarious because even the mere mention of Cornette having to say the name Vernon Deaton, even he couldn't do it with a straight face. But then he follows it with saying that when Deaton walked into the store to get his wrestling gear, he was almost arrested for false advertisement. See, this is why we need Cornette on color commentary for AEW every week. Can you imagine the fucking great lines we'd get during Dynamite if Cornette was out there vibing with JR or Excalibur or Tony? Magic. And while this match is going on, the entire time, my focus is on listening to Cornette and David going back and forth with one another, because David is constantly telling Corny directly to his face, Baby Doll is going to destroy you. He's not even trying to be impartial about it. Just flat out telling Corny to his face that he's a piece of shit and he's going to get destroyed by Baby Doll. Love this man with a passion. And I also love this finish. The entire match is just a Russian's onslaught from beginning to end. I don't even think Ivan let these fuckers get a minute of shine on him. It's mostly just Crusher and Ivan toying around with all three job guys. And I don't think Nikita tagged in at all in this match until the very end, where he comes in, decks Vernon with a Russian sickle, and pins him. One move. So then we had the return of the Warlord, wrestling Mike Samani. And as we remember from Warlord's debut a couple weeks back, he was obviously very green, didn't have a lot of ring experience by this point. His entire offense consisted of, I believe, one overhead press slam. Well, now we can add the running power slam to Warlord's offensive arsenal. Still completely unexplained as to why Baby Doll was accompanying Warlord during this time, but they did do the stare down with Baby Doll, Warlord, calling for Bubba and Corny to fight them in the ring. But we didn't get that because they immediately cut to a Waylon Jennings pre-tape where he was plugging the Bash Tour. So 22 minutes into the show, we get David and Tony plugging the Bash Tour. And it was at this point that Cornette stepped out of the commentary booth. Momentarily, that is, because he was back a couple segments later. But this was notable for mostly one thing. Jim Crockett Jr. in his attire. Funny story about this. I actually had to go back and watch it again because the first time I had my Word document open where I was typing up notes from the previous segment, trying to wrap that up. So I actually missed most of this segment visually the first go around. I was only listening through my headphones. And the split moment before they cut away, I got like a millisecond visual of Jim Crockett and his wacky fedora, and I said, what the fuck was that? So I rewound it. I saw the entire segment again with Jim Crockett on screen. My jaw fell to the floor as I'm watching this hideous fashion error melt my eyes in front of me. And I'm trying to resist the urge to break out laughing while Crockett is trying to cut this super serious promo, hyping up the Bash Tour. Not only is it a total dad hat, but it's not even like it's color coordinated with the rest of his shirt and tie. Because the color scheme he had going on was basically pink. And the fedora, I don't even know how to describe it. It was something you'd be wearing during a Christmas holiday party. It was red, green, and yellow with like a really nasty cream overtone to it. I'm guessing his wife did not pick out this outfit. And that took us to David Crockett doing a little sit-down interview with Magnum and Dusty. And this was... well, it was something. I'll give it that. Firstly, we've got David talking about how the Great American Bash is taking place in the only country in the world where people are free to express their opinions, which, I mean, it's not entirely true, although we are the only country that has a founding document that grants its citizens the right to express their opinion openly and freely without government intervention. How easily we forget about that. Although with the direction our country's headed these days, who knows how long that'll even be a thing. And he's asking Magnum and Dusty what freedom means to them and the whole 9 yards. And they're both babyface in America in about every way imaginable. It's all good material. They're trying to connect this with the Great American Bash somehow, although the dots don't fully connect. Let's just leave it at that. Dusty, I'm still not entirely sure what he was talking about here. I'm honestly not even convinced he was sober when he was talking, but it was very patriotic. Kind of reminds you of a time where this country actually shared morals and values, and even if we didn't necessarily agree on everything politically, you know, the one common trait Americans used to share is that we had this unbridled love for this country, and we all used to agree that it was the best country to live in, regardless of race and gender, ethnicity, religious affiliation, what have you. In 2022, I don't know what the fuck this country stands for anymore. You know, even if you're not a diehard wrestling fan, but you're just looking for some historical context to show you just how different things were back before social media and back when people could actually have rational discussions about things, and just go watch old wrestling tapes from the territories. Look at the way they used to book patriotic storylines. You know, look at the how the people used to actually respond whenever it was USA versus the Soviet Union or USA versus Germany or whatever was culturally relevant at the time. It really was a unique period in the business. And it also goes to show just how easily a nation can fall from sharing these morals and values once we start adopting collectivist ideologies from radicals that want nothing but to tear down everything this country stands for. But I don't want to get too political now. So then we had Ole and Arn versus Tony Zane and Rocky Kernodle. And the entirety of my notes read as follows. Anderson domination. Ole hits a diving knee onto Zane and submits him with an armbar/arm wrench. Literally nothing else to say about it. And then we had a fucking Dynamite promo with all the Horsemen, minus Flair. And everyone's just a house of fire during this whole deal. Starting with JJ sharing some more insight on the greatness of what America stands for. The old pull yourself up by the bootstraps comment where he says, America doesn't guarantee you immediate success. Rather, it's the opportunities that America presents you that guarantee your success. But you have to do the work. It's the quality of opportunity versus equality of outcome discussion that nobody likes having because all the leftists get pissed off when someone presents them with a case that equity/equality of outcome never works, and it hasn't worked throughout the history of whatever country has tried it. Beautiful stuff. JJ's recapping the segment with the Road Warriors from last week and putting over how the Horsemen made examples of them. We are totally talking about how you can throw all the baby faces in the world at the Horsemen, but they'll knock them all back down. Ole is still vowing to end Dusty's career by the end of 86. And, Arn did a promo too, but Ole kind of walked off camera for a minute. I presume to jaw jack with some of the crowd hecklers because they were getting pretty wound up during Arn's promo. Couldn't understand much of what Arn said, aside from talking about how if you want to be champion, you've got to take public opinion and throw it to the wayside because it does not guarantee you a win. But this is a great closer here as they're all going in for the group huddle and they're trying to get Ole's attention so he can join in with them. And they're all shouting, Ole! Ole! So finally, Ole runs in. They do the big huddle. They're all pumping themselves up to beat some ass on the Bash Tour. And this is fantastic. Coming back from commercial, we had Precious Paul Ellering out for a solo promo. And it was incognito, sporting a ball cap and shades, and apparently having trimmed the sides of his beard. So now he's basically sporting the circular beard. But this is where they showed the replay of last week's deal with Hawk jumping Flair in the final segment. Obviously, that's where the Horsemen all ran in for the heat attack. Animal and Paul got laid out on the outside at one point. We saw the visual again of Arn almost losing his grip while trying to hold up Hawk overhead in a suplex position. And that was followed with Animal and Hawk throwing their 2 cents in with the whole thing at the booth. They are spitting and fuming over what the Horsemen did to them. Animal saying he's never been laid out like that before, but he promises that he'll never let his guard down or allow something like that to ever happen again. And Hawk does another passionate babyface promo where he's talking about the fact that it took all the Horsemen to lay out Hawk the way they did, which means they're scared. And Hawk's telling Flair that in Philly, it's just the two of them alone to settle the score, and Hawk's going to slap that fucker right out of the stadium. And by the time this was over, I can confidently say that Hawk and Animal were so convincing and promising that they were going to beat the fuck out of the Horsemen. I legitimately peed myself in fear on behalf of the Horsemen. And keep in mind, this show happened 36 years ago. I wasn't even born yet. We had the Rock and Roll Express taking on Thunderfoot and the Golden Terror. Thunderfoot, who was decked out in more gold than the actual Golden Terror. It was funny because this match even went through a commercial, yet my notes are still the same as every other Rock and Roll squash. Double drop kick, 1, 2, 3, done. We had a pre-tape Ric Flair promo in the empty studio. And this is irony at its finest, because if y'all remember from last week, Flair did a promo on Dusty saying he was a coward because he didn't have the guts to show up to the studio to cut his own promos, saying he had to hide behind a camera in an empty building instead of coming out to talk like a man. Meanwhile, 7 days later, what is Ric Flair doing? Pre-taped interviews in empty studios. Wonderful. Anyway, the entire promo can be summed up as follows. Flair promises to beat all top 14 contenders during the Bash Tour to keep his belt. And he almost did. Almost, but not quite. So then we had, oh God help me. I'm not making this match up. Shaska Whatley and Baron Von Raschke versus Dave Spencer and Lee Peak. Much like the earlier match where I was talking about how my attention was mostly directed to the commentary with David and Cornette instead of the actual in-ring action, same can be said about this match. Paul Jones and Jim Cornette are talking about the photoshopped image of the Bald Jones that Jimmy Valiant and the Raging Bull have been showing over the last few weeks, just fucking with the poor guy. And each time we see the graphic, Paul Jones stops everything he's doing during his promos so that he can scream to the top of his lungs that he never wants to see the image ever again. So what happens here? Well, they put the image back up, and Paul Jones once again breaks out into hysterics over it. Excellent. It's also made better by the fact that I think the story with the fake photo is that Paul isn't entirely sure who's responsible for the photo to begin with. I don't know, maybe the guy you're currently in a feud with? And then we had a Russians promo that started off as a pretty run-of-the-mill Russians deal, but right at the tail end, Nikita Koloff started doing his promo on Ric Flair, because obviously they're setting up for him as one of the challengers on the Bash Tour. And if you're all familiar where things go in terms of storylines in 1986, fast forward to Starrcade about 6 months out from now, Flair is wrestling Nikita in the main event for the World Heavyweight title on that very show. So I guess you could say this is an early teaser to start building up that program. Keep in mind, too, not too far off from now is the point where Magnum's career comes to a pretty abrupt ending because of the car accident. And that's about the point where Dusty starts making the decision to turn Nikita babyface and set him up as the big title contender for Flair toward the end of the calendar year. I'm not trying to get into spoilers or anything like that, but it is a pretty substantial plot development. And as far as my memory goes with the whole Flair-Nikita thing, I don't think that was something that was planned all that far in advance. So for all you geeks out there that are constantly raving about long-term storytelling, well, sometimes short-term unplanned stuff works just as better. Especially back in the day when the bookers were actually good at their jobs. Tully Blanchard versus the Italian Stallion. It went about a minute, and Tully won with the slingshot. That is followed with the Paul Jones Army out for a promo, and this was classic Paul Jones here. He begins by fucking up a line in the first 10 seconds where he tells Cornette that he smells like a fresh of breath air. And they left that in. And then he follows with bumbling and fumbling and stumbling over some more words. And then he just stops his promo midway through sentence to pass the mic off to Shaska. Just totally gave up trying. He knew he had nothing to say, and he wasn't even going to try to fish around for material. Fuck it. I got 3 other dudes here. They can talk. And for those of you that haven't seen the show, you need to check out a clip of it on YouTube, if for no other reason than to check out this classic television moment with Paul Jones. So, Shaska's doing his usual incoherent babbling about God knows what, and the entire time he's talking, I'm keeping my eyes on Paul Jones in the background, because while Jones is standing next to Big Bubba, I don't know if Paul Jones just caught Bubba out of the corner of his eye and didn't notice he was standing there, but once Jones realized that Bubba was about 2 feet to the side of him, Paul Jones turns his head to Bubba. He strikes a look of imminent fear, and then he very slowly backs out of the frame to distance himself from this very large man. I laughed so hard at this. The main event was Wahoo McDaniel and Ron Garvin versus Paul Garner and Kent Glover. Only thing I wrote down about this is that it appears Wahoo and Ron got haircuts. So maybe that was their inspiration to pair these two together for a squash on this show. Beyond that, I have nothing else to say about it. But our closing promo with Jimmy Valiant and the Raging Bull. Just a perfect ending to the show. And it starts off great with Bull coming up with all these metaphors and idioms to describe what Paul's going to look like after him and Valiant shave him bald on the Bash Tour. I heard something about bald as a peach and peach fuzz and hard-boiled eggs, I believe. And something to that extent. And then Jimmy Valiant runs in the last 30 seconds to promise that in addition to shaving Paul Jones and his goons, they're also going to strip them naked and I guess proceed to fuck each and every one of them on the spot. Good thing they didn't have live pay-per-view at that time, otherwise that would not have gone over well. Great show, though. Again, it's unfortunate I won't be able to cover the lost episodes of the Tape Bash Tour shows from 86, but you can all blame Peacock for that. It is a garbage streaming service as it is, but hey, for $9 a month or whatever I'm paying for limited commercial time, it's worth it. I mean, who knows how much longer WWE content is even going to be on that service. At least we got the classic content, though, because that was my prime reason for getting this subscription to begin with. All right. Star Wars Part 2. Last week, we got some great stuff from the first set of matches they taped from the Reunion Arena show, including the Texas Heavyweight title match with gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and David Von Erich, as well as the hair match with Buddy Roberts and the Iceman. So this week, the featured match was the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship match, which, well, we'll get to it. The first match for the week was the handicap match with Kamala wrestling the team of Arman Hussein, Toriatsu, and Mike Bond's god-awful fucking haircut. Pretty much the story by now for all that are well-attuned to how Kamala squash matches go. It's basically what you got here. Kamala pounded on all three guys like a drum. He ends up pinning Yatsu a few minutes in, and Hussein quickly helps him to the back and walks out of the match entirely. And that leaves Mike Bond to be the sacrificial lamb until Bruiser Brody runs in at the finish and tries to get into the big square-off with Kamala. And of course, Skandar Akbar and Friday are there to restrain him, preventing from getting physical with Brody. And then we see Brody carry Mike Bond out of the ring before they cut away. But here's what I'm still trying to figure out. According to the wiki page, there was an added stipulation to this match where the loser of the fall must leave the Dallas territory. And as far as I can recollect, having watched this back, it's never addressed during the segment. And moreover, I'm still trying to figure out how that stipulation would have even worked in a handicap scenario. Okay, so it's 3-on-1, so would Kamala only have to pin one of the guys from the other team to send them out of the territory? Or would he have to beat all three? I have no idea. And judging how Hussein never actually got pinned in the match, technically this match never had a decisive winner. So the booking of the whole thing never really made a lot of sense to me. And I know that Hussein ended up leaving the Dallas region right around this time anyway, so this is probably his final send-off, which accounted for the loser leaves town stip. But since he never actually got pinned here, I'm not entirely sure how they would have enforced that rule. I don't know, maybe someone who knows their world-class history a little better can help me out with that, but yeah, I'm totally out to lunch there. The stipulations of this match were kind of weird. And speaking of Brody, Mark Lawrence conducted a little interview with him prior to the American Tag Team title match later on. And Brody's talking about how he had been out of the Dallas region for a while, but when Kerry called him from Japan to invite him over to help him out in his ongoing feud with the Freebirds, Brody said yes, knowing that he had heard the Freebirds calling him out by saying that he was going to no-show. And, I'll tell you what. Take one look at Bruiser Brody. Put yourself in the shoes of a Michael Hayes or a Terry Gordy trying to call that man a coward, saying that he will not show up to fight you. Just seeing that man stare into a camera and promise that he's going to kill you is enough to make your knees freeze and your liver quiver, daddy. What a fucking presence that guy had. I mean, the blade job scars on the forehead are enough to sell you on the fact that that guy meant business. Then we had the unexpected swerve of the night. What ended up being an unforeseen turn of events. In the lead up to the show, we were all expecting it to be Ric Flair versus Kevin Von Erich for the NWA World Heavyweight title. However, a few days before the show, Flair ended up dropping the strap to Harley Race. So we ended up getting Race defending against Kevin here. And again, this is where my knowledge of wrestling history kind of hits a little bit of a gray area. I'm not entirely sure what led to the decision to have Flair drop the belt to Race. Whether that was a political decision from Jim Crockett, whether something happened where Flair wasn't able to make the show, so they needed to get the belt off of him. Either way, I have to assume this is a last-minute turnaround because they had really been pushing the Flair-Kevin rematch for the show, but for whatever reason, they ended up going in a completely different direction. But this also goes to show just how talented the Von Erich family truly were as workers because Kevin Von Erich versus Ric Flair match was going to be an entirely different match from Kevin versus Harley Race. Like, two very different styles, which basically forced Kevin to go in there and do an entirely different match with a very short notice. God, this match was fantastic. The whole thing was mostly built around the story of Kevin injuring his shoulder after getting dumped to the outside. And after the early flurry of offense where Kevin was a house of fire on Harley, he was out wrestling him, outmaneuvering him. From the point that Harley dumped Kevin outside the ring and he started favoring the shoulder, the match became a total one-sided heat angle for Harley to just work over Kevin. I did kind of tilt my head at the spot about midway through where Kevin blatantly stuck his hand down his trunks. We were told from Mercer that he was trying to compensate for the shoulder injury. I don't know, I just presumed he was doing the deed. Probably not the most ideal time to be beating the meat, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do, I'm also not entirely sure how grabbing your coxswains is supposed to help nurse a shoulder injury, but there's a lot about professional wrestling that I still don't really understand. But the injury angle ended up playing into the finish because Race is just stomping away on Kevin. He's basically got the match in the bag. And he dumps him outside again. And eventually David runs down to try and help his brother out. And while David's trying to pop Kevin's shoulder back in, Race goes over and paintbrushes David across the face with his boot. So this pisses David off. He runs in for the blatant DQ, starts wailing away on Race. And before he hands the world title back to him, David proclaims that it's his turn for a title shot, and if he can't beat Harley, he will quit the business. So, like I said, the whole scene was a strange turn of events. Going from the last-minute change of Flair dropping the strap to Harley for this match, leading to the DQ finish run-in from David to set up him and Harley, which, looking back, I'm not entirely sure if that match ever happened in the span of June to November of 83. Because if y'all remember, Flair ended up winning the belt back from Harley at Starrcade that year. There have been Harley Race and David Von Erich matches. A lot of those matches took place in like the 70s in the Fort Worth region before World Class was even a thing. And of course, we all know about David's tragic death by February of 84, so there's not a lot of wiggle room if you think about it to do that match again. Or I'm curious if they ever actually taped this for a world-class taping or if it was like a dark match or something, but that'll be interesting. God, I can't believe we're coming up on that too, David's death. Yeah, you really think about it, we're moving along through the timeline here of world-class programming. David's only really around for another 8 or so months. Man. It's also kind of that moment in time where world class started to lose a lot of its steam, but that's a bridge we'll cross once we get there. For sure, though, a title match that everyone needs to check out, especially if you enjoy classic content. Just old school great stuff here. Really nothing else to say about it. Then we had a Michael Hayes promo, and he's doing the Freebird thing, talking about how he's a champion and he loves nothing more than to bring home the dough to his wife so they can have a good time. Putting over the fact that Brody's a wild man, and he's noticing how excited Lawrence is because he's salivating at the thought of Bruiser Brody whipping Hayes and Gordy from pillar to post. By the way, Mark Lawrence's demeanor in this entire promo is just perfect. Because when Hayes looks at Lawrence and goes, "You just can't wait to see Kerry and Brody get their hands on us, can you?" And Lawrence turns to the camera with that smug look on his face like, "You're damn right I can't wait." Great stuff. And God, Hayes was so on fire during this promo. Like doing his best to sell you on the fact that he and Gordy aren't sweating the match, even though his delivery tells you an entirely different story. Like he knows they're fucked. And I love his closing line here. "Brody, I used to respect you until I found out you were a Texan, and now you're just scum like the rest of them." Back when heels knew how to actually get heat. But what can you do? And then we got the main event, Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes versus Bruiser Brody and Kerry Von Erich for the American Tag Team Championships. And of course, Hayes is still irate about the whole Buddy Roberts situation, so he cuts a promo on the Iceman before the opening bell, challenging him to a lights-out match, and if the Iceman beats him, he'll let him cut his hair. Once again, for context purposes, the backstory to this match was that the Freebirds were going to defend their belts against Kerry Von Erich if he could find a partner that was not Kevin or David. And because Michael Hayes was a sly dog, he did some research in the weeks leading up to the show to ensure that any of Kerry's longtime friends were going to be out of state, so they would not be able to participate in this match. All of which were accounted for except for one man, Bruiser Brody. So Hayes' plan backfired on him. Match was fairly uneventful. It was really short, too. I think the whole thing went less than 5 minutes. But the most impressive thing was Brody giving Terry Gordy a one-armed body slam. And for those of you that may not recall, Terry Gordy was not a small man. It's a fun little domination showcase for the babyfaces. Brody wrecks shop at the end. Kerry ends up springing off the ropes on a drop down over Hayes. He runs right into Brody, who scoops Kerry up into his arms, tosses him on top of Hayes for the 3, and the babyfaces win the belts. Yeah, the card structure to have this go on last made sense. I mean, you weren't going to have the show close with the NWA World Title match, especially not in the Dallas region. God, those people would have fucking rioted if they would have closed the show with Kevin getting screwed out of the belt like that. So closing the show with Kerry and Brody winning the tag straps made perfect sense. Good, solid stuff. And I'll say this, while I can't judge the show as a whole because they did not air any of the interpromotional content with the All Japan matches, the feuds that they had been building up on the world-class TV shows paid off well here. I enjoyed the hair match with the Iceman and Buddy. The Garvin-David Von Erich match was a good cliffhanger for future television shows. The Kamala Squash was what it was. The Harley Race Kevin Von Erich was probably the best story-driven match in the entire show. And again, considering the last-minute title switch, I thought they made the most of it. And they set up David's little angle afterwards well, too. And the tag match at the end was short and sweet. Didn't need to be anything flashy, just something to send the Dallas faithful home happy. Definitely a show I'd recommend everyone go out of your way to check out. Again, this is during a period where World Class was at its peak in terms of nationwide recognition and popularity. They had big stars in the region by this point, and they were gaining a lot of traction with their product being built essentially off of one key feud with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. And, as we talk about all the time, they rode that horse to death, but the people were into it. I can certainly promise you'll get more out of this show than you probably did out of that Forbidden Door pay-per-view over the weekend. Good Lord. Anyway, that'll wrap it up for this one. That'll also wrap it up for the Star Wars series there. Great show. And thanks for checking out the podcast this week. We'll be back this coming Monday for the Rampage and Power reports. And we'll also be reviewing WWE's Money in the Bank Premium Live event. And much like the Hell in a Cell card from last month, I'm once again going in completely blind, making sure that I do not preview the card beforehand because I'm purely going in as a casual viewer. I don't watch Raw, I don't watch SmackDown, I don't keep up with any of the clips or social media buzzes. So whatever happens on Sunday night, my opinions will be fresh off of whatever I see on that show. Not sure what the expectations are, much less who's even a possible consideration to be the Money in the Bank holder right now. I think the obvious plan was Cody before he got hurt, so I have no idea what they're going to do. Safe bet would probably be on Seth if they're looking to advance some kind of story with him and Cody for next year over the belt. But, well, it's WWE, so they'll probably go with a swerve and have Brock Lesnar win like they did. What was that, last year or the year before? When Lesnar wasn't even booked in the match to begin with, but he came out and won it anyway. You gotta love WWE booking. It is always something to behold. Anyway, take care all. Peace out.